Hello, everyone, and happy Friday to you all out there. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today we have guest number two from the LA Comic Con this year. And if you saw my video announcing the new books and comics that I got, then you may have also seen the impressions video of this book. And honestly, I'm so excited to tell you all about this book and the creator behind it. So, my creator is one of the publishers of Critical Entertainment, which is an LA based publishing company specializing in comic books and graphic novels. My guest is a comic book and graphic novel writer looking to create successful stories in the entertainment industry. A graduate of cinema and television arts program at California State University Northridge, he aims to produce engaging stories on a reflective and intellectual level, drawing desire from customers who want original and diverse and creative products. Living in Los Angeles, California, my guest publishes his graphic novels and comics through Critical Entertainment, while he writes new and exciting books. My guest is a talented writer who has published several comic books such as Zombie Zero, Planetary Expansion, Space Dragon, The First Americans, and The Cowboy with Many Hats, and exhibits at Comic-Con International, WonderCon, LA Comic-Con, which is where I met him, and Long Beach Comic-Con. He boasts a passion for creative writing, including comic book publishing, editing, and graphic design skills. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to Mr. Christopher Reda. Christopher, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Gabriel. How you doing, man?
It's so great to have you here on the show, Christopher, and I'm so excited for my viewers to learn more about the inner workings of the first Americans. But before we dive into that, and of course, critical entertainment, is there anything else you would like to add about your background?
Yeah, so I went to film school and really I just trying to make original stories that are creative and intellectually driven and yeah, trying to make good comics, trying to make good movies. So we're trying to do that through critical entertainment here.
Awesome. Now, for viewers who have not seen my video impressions or review of First Americans, Christopher, can you tell us what this series ultimately focuses on?
Yeah, so my series here, The First Americans, this is set 14,000 years ago, and it follows a tribe of Paleo Indians as they travel from Siberia into North America for the very first time during the late Ice Age. And yeah, it's basically a survival story of about this tribe of Paleo Indians as they try and fight for survival as they migrate into North America.
Awesome. And I have to say, viewers and listeners, I don't want to give too many spoilers to it, but it is so not only beautifully drawn, it's just the storytelling is so good. And I don't want to give too many more spoilers than that because you have to go and purchase a copy because it is that good. One thing I will also say, if you saw the show Primal by Getting Tarkovsky, you will definitely enjoy The First Americans. And that's all I'm going to say, guys. I don't want to spoil it too much. So, Christopher, before we dive into your series, let's talk a little bit more about you. So, it seems to me that you've always been a very creative person growing up. And this desire to tell stories, did this come about early in life or later in life?
This kind of happened a little bit more in college. I was originally going to try to be a computer programmer.
Oh,
Um, I was I had very strong math skills, and my mom was a computer programmer. But as I was in college, I kind of got tired of doing it. It really, it didn't satisfy that much creatively for me. And I started taking some film classes and they really captured me, and it was really interesting on how you can shoot a movie a completely different way and it brings a different feeling to it, not just the story but like how it's shot, how it's designed, how the director you know directs the actors and gets their kind of performance and what camera angles to use and what camera shots to use. So I really kind of fell in love with that. And I'd always kind of been a creative person. I took a lot of like art classes and art history classes, but they were kind of more like fun electives. And I didn't
Mm,
think too much of it. And I used to like draw my own comics when I was a kid, right? I draw my own Spider-Man fighting Venom 5-page comic, and I never really thought too much of it until I started falling in love with film. And so I transferred over to Pasadena City College, which has a really good film program. And then I learned a lot over there with Professor Lindsay Jang. And then I transferred to Cal State University Northridge, which is another really nice film school here in California. So I finished up my degree there, and then kind of fell back in love with comics. And they kind of had that revolution of everyone's adapting comic books,
mm,
um, all Robert Kirkman stuff, Steve Niles, 30 Days a Night, and The Walking Dead, and Frank Miller's, Sin City.
right.
So I kind of got into just doing comics, and so now I'm kind of do a little bit of a dual role where I make comic books, but I'm also trying to get them made into Hollywood films. And so that's kind of the route that we've taken.
Interesting. So, what would you say was your aha moment when you realized that this was something that you wanted to pursue as a career for the rest of your life?
As kind of like a moment, I mean, probably when I finished Zombie Zero here,
Mm,
and the differences of making a screenplay and making like a comic script that you give to an artist is your movie's kind of done at the end, and you have a lot more control over it, especially if you're kind of editing yourself or you're hiring the artist. Um, like once the book's done, you have your full movie, and not, it pretty much has your fingerprints and the artist's fingerprints and the
right.
letterist, and that's it. Um, film, you're working with hundreds of people. Even if it's a small film, you're still dealing with like a skeleton crew of like 12 to 15 people. And, you have to keep the screenwriter happy, the director happy, the producer happy, the assistant happy,
Hmm.
like there's so many hands in the kitchen. Um, you kind of lose control over it, which is good on itself, you know, because the more creative people you have on a project, sometimes it can be better, but you do have to give up that control. And making something in Hollywood, it takes a long time, it takes
Yes.
years. Um, Zombie Zero's been optioned for almost 4 years now, but we have a director and a screenplay, and it moves along, but if I just waited on one project to be made into a film, I'd be sitting on my hands. So um, I really just, writing more stories, writing more books, getting more IP.
Nice. That's actually, very, very true. It's almost the same for like, authors. When we write our first book, we think, okay, we're gonna find, a publisher that's really gonna be interested in our stories, writing the Curie letters. And I was like you said, we're on our hands just waiting, but there's a lot more we can do, which like, create more stories, get out of our box, and just keep growing and building our brand and just enhancing our writing. And speaking of writing, let's actually now dive into the creation of the first Americans. So when you began this series, after you finally got, okay, I know what the story is, I know how it's going to end. Ultimately, when you sat down with your team, the artists and everybody, what were the goals you had for yourself for this project, and also B, what were your promises and goals you guys were making to your readers and fans?
I mean, kind of, the promise to myself is to have another book that I think kind of reaches out to a lot of different people and gets a lot of different people to kind of think about who actually lived here first. You
Right.
know, um, immigration's kind of a big, you know, it's a big issue. It's a big topic here in America.
Hmm.
And, you know, people who come here, is it good? Is it bad? I think it's just important to remember that everyone has migrated to this country at some point.
Right.
Everyone has been an immigrant coming into America at some point. I think it's important on this story to realize that Native Americans, they were here first, and that we're all kind of guests in this country. So that's kind of what I was trying to, reach to the audience, is a level of understanding, right? A level of
Hmm.
understanding that we have to share this country, and this is the country of opportunity. And yeah, and I think it's important for me to tell different stories. Um, yeah, zombie books, great and all, but something like The First Americans, it's a little more educational. I have a
Yeah.
lot more people who are teachers who go, I can show this in a classroom. You know, it's a story that you can kind of learn historically about people who came here, and learn about people in general during the late ice age. The first time people started domesticating wolves. And
Hmm.
now, our little dogs that we have that are so cute, they started from stories like this, you
Yes.
know. So I think it's one of the goals of our company is to have a lot of different genres and to appeal to a lot of different people. And I think that's something that this story kind of can accomplish.
That's really great, Christopher. Thank you for sharing that. And so now, after jumping ahead in time, now when you guys got the first print issue, you got it published, and you're shipping it out to your customers and also showcasing it at conventions. What was the initial reaction like from your fans, from your readers who purchased the First Americans? Was it positive, negative, or somewhere in the middle?
Um, you know, pretty much with pretty much most of our stories, we have a positive feedback. If you're at a convention, there's if someone's coming up to your booth and checking your stuff out, they already kind of have an open mind, you
Hmm.
know. Um, so our but specifically on this project, we've had a lot of great feedback and a lot of positive interactions with it. You know, there's the teachers who go, "Oh my God, I can show this in my classroom." It's not just a superhero book of
Right.
just violence or whatever. And there's violence in it, but it's, this is stuff that people had to deal
Hmm.
with 14,000 years ago. Um, we've had a lot of positive feedback from Native Americans who feel represented in this book. Um, and just, everyone's really enjoyed this book. It's just something that's different. Um, it's a different genre. It's a different setting that people aren't as used to in comic books.
I absolutely have to agree. It's a really, really great story. It really lets the reader go on the journey with the character. And this may, well, it's maybe just a little bit of a spoiler, uh, viewers and listeners, is that in the first two issues, what I found really fascinating is that, in comic books, there's always the dialogue bubbles so that way people know what's happening. What I found very fascinating with the First Americans, there is no dialogue, which I found to be a very, very cool and unique thing in the first two books because it allows us to imagine, okay, what are they talking about? We see the action, we see what's happening. Now let's actually imagine what they're saying. I absolutely love that. And it's very, very, accurate to times because we probably don't know what the ancestral language of the Paleo Indians were. We have no idea. So I absolutely love that direction that the First American is going through, Christopher. And would you agree that the response you've gotten from not just, of course, this, but your other comics has, in a way, validated your goals that you set out, as you mentioned, with telling, original, innovative, and, just good stories in your comics and graphic novels?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as any type of writer or creator, it's always scary being like, are people going to like this or not?
Right.
And you make something and you go, okay, I like it, and it's my cup of tea, but is it everyone else's cup of tea?
Hmm.
And our company, we've had a lot of good feedback on almost all our books. Um, and that's not saying that whatever I write is perfect. I had a few shorts that I first released that weren't as high a quality as these other books. It's all a process. So, um, the First Americans, positive reviews, Planetary Expansion, that's almost like a little bit of a harder sell for us, but everyone
Mm.
who reads it absolutely loves it. And the reviews on that are good. Our book, Space Dragon, here, it's another one of those books without a lot of dialogue. No dialogue, right? All
Right.
visual. Um, all our reviews on this book have been really good. So, I mean, pretty much all our properties people like, even our short stories. The ones that Mason Mendoza, our other writer on our company, those have been all positive. So, the challenge now the challenge isn't as much as our readers going to like it. It's how do I reach readers, right? You know,
Right.
I'm not Image or Dark Horse or those companies,
Hmm.
which is fine, that's just kind of how it is. But
Right.
right now, it's audience growth is kind of our biggest challenge because as long as they can read it, they're going to like it. So that it does feel good that people like your stuff, but then you slowly realize, okay, just because a book's good doesn't mean it's going to sell out through the roof, right?
Right. That's absolutely true. And you actually brought up something that we'll touch on later in the business side, excuse me, of the interview. But before we get to that, there is sort of like a reflective question that I think is important to discuss. You did bring it up not too long ago, which is, are people going to enjoy it? Reader enjoyment and the audience enjoyment. And, you know, making a product such as this, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not a get rich quick scheme, be it a book, graphic novel, or comic. It's years and years of planning. And especially, I would imagine for comics or graphic novels, maybe a little bit longer, because it's not so much the story, but it's also you want to find the right artist whose style matches what the story is conveying, that it matches, and then marketing that, and then especially now in the digital age, there's so many comic books from so many different companies. Like imagine Dark Horse, Marvel, Detective Comics, etc. It's a little intimidating to see like, are people actually going to enjoy this? Because you know in comics now, it's either Vertigo or superheroes, a little bit of gothic, horror, superheroes in the mainstream, etc. So it's a little intimidating when it's a story that's outside the norm. So I'm wondering for you, Christopher, for you and your fellow people at Critical Entertainment, have you guys ever had that sense of like anxiety or hesitancy or even imposter syndrome when you guys create a new product, a new IP? And if so or not, what has motivated you guys to continue telling new and original stories, regardless, as you said, it may not, skyrocket to the roots, but it's still a great original story.
Well, kind of like in my film background, film creators don't go, oh, I have to make a superhero movie to make money. Because that's kind of how it is almost in the comic industry here. Like, if
Mm,
you're not doing some super hero story that's really popular, it it's tough. And you might go, okay, well, look at some of these books that Boom and Dark Horse, but you kind of forget that maybe that's their top book, but what about the other 10 books that they released that you don't hear about?
right.
And they get lost amongst the weeds, 200 books come out a week through Diamond and Lunar. So, like, those are professional books. That's who you're fighting against. So it is difficult. Um, but Yeah, as from a film background, I go, the First Americans would be a great story. I don't go, well, it doesn't fall into the conventional wisdom of comic books where we don't do Ice Age books or we don't do Native American books or something like that. That's not what scares me when going into a story. That's just how it is. You come up with original stuff when you're kind of a filmmaker. So I'm very far removed from I want to write for Batman or Superman or whatever. That's kind of not my career goal.
Definitely. It's almost, the same mindset. I've talked with a lot of authors on the show who said that, we write for ourselves. I'm not trying to, write for like the trends or the clicks or any of the cliches in the publishing industry. I'm just here trying to tell my original story. And if that gets what I want, then that's, good. That's incredible. And now this is a perfect segue to the business side of the interview. And I'm really eager to hear more about this, Christopher. So, as a little icebreaker, can you tell our viewers and listeners how critical entertainment came about in the comic book industry?
Yeah, so basically, my business partner Mason Mendoza and I, about 8 years ago, we have our own comic series. It's called Minion. That's coming out next year. Uh, here's the first issue of it. So really,
Ooh, nice.
we wanted a comic book company that we could publish this book through. And, as I tried to get into Dark Horse and Image and all those places, you kind of learn that they really mostly want established writers, right? You
Mm,
know, um, they want people who've been in the industry for a long time. So this
right,
industry is a lot of I only publish people who have been published, you know, that kind of catch 22 that's very
right.
hard for new creators. So really, we figured why don't we just team up, make our own company, make our own brand, and try to kind of put our stuff through that instead of just, okay, here's Christopher Reda promoting his own book. Now this is our company promoting my books, this company promoting Mason's books. It's kind of opened a lot of doors for us. It allowed us to get bigger booths at Comic-Con and WonderCon. And, when you have a company, you have an LLC behind you, there's a lot more confidence, a lot more confidence when applying for Diamond or Lunar or things like that. So that's, you know, we basically didn't want to have our stuff owned by another company and be able to shop our own stuff. You know, we are super creator owned. So, when I sold Zombie Zero to be optioned, I had no one there to get in my way. There was no
Mm.
one there was no other publisher, who has my book that says, no, actually, oh, but I want 10%. Well, they're not Paramount. I don't know, like, so.
Ah, I
So
see.
a lot of it's about controlling your IP as well, because, even if you have your IP at a publisher and they say, hey, we're going to help get your book into a movie and stuff, it's actually going to slow you down with that goal. It's going to slow
Mm.
you down with that goal because then you have another company that has to agree to things and maybe they might not really understand the film industry.
That's actually very true. And everything you just said is, the same thing in the publishing industry, especially for authors who want to go in traditional publishing. A lot of them said the same thing. There's almost like this gatekeeper mentality when these big publishing houses, they take on these new books and they have to see, is this book going to be, marketable for us or actually going to get a profit from it? And even if they do accept it, you also run the risk of, am I still going to own the rights of my story, or is this now the sole property of this publisher? How so? It is, very much the same thing, especially here now, especially for me as an indie author, very much the same mentality that I want to have, creative control over my stories. I want to be able to showcase my work to everyone, but not also have to worry about someone else doing the same thing or saying other stuff about my work. And sort of like leading on to that, talking about what you mentioned before, like, the audience. I think that's also very important to really discuss because the audience is probably like the bread and butter for authors, comic book writers, and graphic novel writers. They are, the word of mouth to spread these products. So for you, Christopher, do you guys have a good idea of who your audience is? And as a follow up, especially to the first Americans, when did you consider the audience for this series, or did you not consider the audience in the sense that you just wrote the story and then just put it out there for the readers to experience it themselves?
I mean, in terms of considering the audience, it's, I almost don't think too much of when I'm writing a story, how big is my audience going to be?
Mm,
I just go, okay, I have a zombie story and I want to tell it.
right,
And, uh, you know, as we get more and more books, we might go, okay, well, let's see, we don't have a horror book. Maybe we'll do a horror book and we can start grabbing some of those customers. We have a Western book, we have a zombie book, we have sci-fi books. So we are trying to throw kind of like a wide net.
right,
And the First Americans, once again, it's a different genre. So we're kind of we reach a different audience with that. People who want some that's more educational, more grounded in reality. People who like Ice Age stories. So someone who picks up the Cowboy with many hats might not necessarily pick up the First Americans. Um, so, but when I wrote it, I wasn't like, okay, well, let's see, people in the Pacific Northwest are going to like this a lot.
right,
We noticed that. People in Canada, uh, Oregon, Washington State, areas like that. Kind of have people who are more interested in the books. And then, I don't, when we wrote it, it's like a lot of people are like, oh, this is so educational. Oh, this is supposed to be, no, it's still a fiction, like adventure
right.
story. I wasn't like thinking this was going to go in library books, but, you know, that's just kind of how it came about. And it's nice having kind of a different genre, something that's educational, something that people can learn from, and some about American history.
Definitely. And as an add-on to that, were you surprised by the readership? Because as an author, as a creator, you want to target like either a specific audience, but even within that audience, there are certain readers that you're trying to market towards, whether it's young adult, new adult, or adult readers. And sometimes the readership can be vastly different than your target audience. So, has there ever been that experience for any of your books?
I don't know, not really. I mean, we kind of to go over again, we try to have the books be as diverse as possible. So, the First Americans appeals to a lot of different people, while Zombie Zero appeals to a whole different set of people, or Planetary Expansion appeals to another set of people. And, Mace and I are very we want stories that appeal for men and women. Try to have more characters that are both, have a
Right.
male lead and a female lead. We do the same in Planetary Expansion too. Um, so we're not just trying to get the 18 through 45 male only. We are trying to get like 18 to like 65 everybody. Um,
Right.
but we are dealing with the comic book industry, which is a little more male. There's more male readers. And if, I'm not really writing, I'll do a romance at some point, but I'm not like Top Cow, who's just completely
Mm.
turned into like a female reader, romance only type publisher. So, I mean, we're just trying to appeal to as many people as possible.
Nice. And kind of leading into that, the next question I want to ask you is a very, very fun one. Because actually, a previous guest of mine actually asked me this during his interview. Again, shout out to Eric Bowden for this. This was an amazing question you asked. So initially, during this part of the interview, I'd always ask my guests, who were the authors, writers, or books that helped you get your voice as a writer, as a creator. But my guest, Eric Bowden, switched that and put it on its head. He said that he doesn't necessarily have specific authors or writers that have, helped him gain his author voice. He does, but at the end of the day, he wants to show his individuality in his works. Because I'm sure you've definitely seen Christopher, either on regular books or comic books, a tagline, so and so meets so and so, or a cross between
Yeah.
this and that. And from a reader's perspective, that's entertaining to us, or at least it gets our attention and we want to go into it. But from the writer's perspective, that may not be such a good thing because it does one of many things. Number one, it pigeonholes the writer into only writing in that genre or that style of writing, or for comic writers, creating stories that are either like Conan the Barbarian, Hellboy, DC, Marvel, whatever, or being compared to a famous writer from any of the major companies. And we're not trying to be like that. We are not trying to imitate or replicate anyone who came before, anyone now. We're trying to show our individuality. So for you, Christopher, how have you been able to manage the balance of both? Where yes, you want to show, reverence and respect to not just, the comic book writers of the past, and may also like media like film or television that may have inspired or helped led to the creation of the first Americans, but also you want to show your individuality as a writer.
Well, I think that kind of every artist is inspired and has blueprints from other creators.
Hmm.
If you look at Tarantino, all of his films reference other old films. So, the successful directors, the successful creators, they've seen what's worked and what's not worked, and they've been inspired. So, yeah, the trick's to come up with your own story and incorporate your own experiences in your own life and
Hmm.
the people that you've met. They're, you know, your characters need to be your own, but at the same time, um, it's a formula. Storytelling's a formula, and the ones that kind of follow the formula and do successful, it's not because they're copying. It's just that this is how life is. Life is kind of this three-act structure,
Right.
and you know, and really just if you focus on your own stories and try to find your own creative ways of doing things, no one's done really the first Americans. There's Primal, and there are a few other examples, Ryan,
Hmm.
but you go in your comic book shop and you don't see the first Americans too much here.
Right.
Um, Zombie Zero is about the last zombie at the end of a zombie apocalypse. So instead of another story about the beginning of a zombie apocalypse, it's about the end, and it follows the zombie who's the main character. So I'm really, just trying to make things as original and creative as possible. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard to think up of a story that hasn't been done because mostly everything has been done, you know.
Yes.
And no matter what you write, people are going to be like, whoa, it looks like that, or it sounds like this, and it looks like that. I mean, Alan Moore's stuff looks like other creators' things too. Frank Miller and all the big creators, they've been inspired by someone. Christopher Nolan, learned how to be a good director, not on his own, but from everything he's gathered and put together.
Definitely, and that's 100% true. We're always going to be inspired by, things that we've enjoyed, whether it's film, books, comic books, graphic novels, or even music. And without thinking it, we will incorporate it or some aspect of it into our own projects. Because at the end of the day, we're all trying to showcase our work, which leads to another question before we get to the big question, which is this. Now, this one I had, tailor made for this interview because I want to hear your thoughts on this, Christopher. So, a previous guest of mine who is also in the comic book industry said that, in mainstream comics, there's almost like this either fatigue or slowdown with like some of the iconic characters in their respective IPs. And a lot of people now, readers especially, are going toward, independent companies, smaller presses to try to get, new stories. So, in your opinion, Christopher, seeing the comic industry, do you believe that there is sort of like this slowdown or burnout with like the new stories, or is there any truth to this?
I think, look, the economy got a little rough, and it's this industry. It follows Marvel and DC a lot, and I'm not crapping on DC and Marvel. I grew up on
Hmm.
Spider-Man and X-Men and Batman. I love that stuff, but I don't read that. I don't read those books anymore. I read independent, original stories, and the reality is the comic book medium. It's not just Marvel and DC. You
Yeah.
know, Will Eisner was not, he did The Spirit, but a lot of his stuff was slice of life, people in their apartment complexes living their life. That's what some of those original comic books were. So, this medium is not just superhero stuff. It's it's an art form, and you can have something like Blankets to Scott Pilgrim. Okay, you can have
Yep.
these different type of stories that's not just Batman and Superman and Spider-Man, and retailers might have to read the back of a book if they want to sell it. They need to be more like bookstores as
Hmm.
opposed to Marvel DC store, you know.
I like that. That is actually, very, very true. That the comic book industry is much more than superheroes, and that there's a whole bunch of other incredible stories. Another point I'll make to this is Latina Superheroes by Caden Phoenix, who wrote A la Brava. Fantastic books where they were superheroes, but not in the traditional sense that we imagine them now in Marvel and DC. They touch on real world issues, which is, I don't want to get too many spoilers to it, so check out those videos. But they were a breath of fresh air, and I think we're all looking for that in the next project, next book, next comic, next graphic novel, next anything. Something that's a little bit different as a breakaway from the norm that's been dominating the industry. As you said, superheroes, it's like the dominance for the comic book industry. In the publishing industry, as I've talked with a lot of authors, it's romance fantasy. It's the most read genre in the publishing industry. It's ridiculous.
So
And
Caden's my friend, actually. I've known her
oh,
for a long
really?
time, and she originally came to me, and she's more of a filmmaker, and she came to me and she was like, "Hey, I hear you do comics." We had a friend hook us up because he knew that I did comics, and they are looking to make comics to get it turned into film. So I taught her a lot of the comic stuff that I learned coming from a film background, and now she does all these incredible books with a lot of really good artists, and yeah, a bunch of original stories, right? Original and diverse stories.
Absolutely. I did not know that. So thank you for sharing that, Christopher. Now I really have to get her on the show now more than ever. And ultimately, from what we've talked about thus far in the business portion, now leads to the culmination of probably one of my favorite questions of this interview, or of all interviews. And it's a big one, Christopher. So just bear with me with it while I lay down the context for it. So, when I began doing podcasting 5 years ago, I was just interviewing my friends who are fellow indie authors. And over the years, I've had the opportunity to meet not just authors, but historians who are authors, professors who have their own books. And now, 2 years prior, meeting indie authors and now branching out into the comic industry and just seeing all these new faces, hearing their stories, wherever they are in their journey, and just learning so much from them. It's so incredible. And ultimately, I think you may agree with this, or may have some thoughts on this, is that for authors as well as comic book writers and graphic novel writers, there's like this two-path route for us, whereas that we want to either be great storytellers or we want to be known as great storytellers. And for me, to be a great storyteller or to be a storyteller in general is someone who's dedicated to the art of, storytelling, crafting their skills, and continuously, building upon what they've done. Not motivated by capital, but it's nice to get a little bit now and then. To be known as an author is someone who wants to focus on the marketing aspect, get their name out there on social media, go on talk shows, podcasts, etc., whatever. And both paths have their own trials and hurdles, as every industry does. But I definitely feel, especially for first timers in either one, the publishing industry or the comic and graphic novel industry, the second path is the most enticing, but leads to the most challenges in the sense, leads to unrealistic goals, and the drive, your passion that you set out with is completely changed or non-existent, which ultimately leads to this statement that I'm going to make, which I made numerous times, is this: regardless of what industry you're in, publishing or the graphic novel comic industry, there's no guarantee your first series, your debut series, is going to guarantee you the start of your legacy or gratification you are expecting. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it is true. There are exceptions, of course, in all industries. There are those whose first work do skyrocket to, like, award-winning status, or they're showcased in all conventions, and that is great for them. That is not an easy feat to do. But generally speaking, you have this roller coaster of highs and lows, and it can be very deflating for first-time creators. So, Christopher, I was wondering if you could provide your input and your insight into this discussion that in this industry, there is no guarantee your debut series is going to get you the rewards you're expecting, but it should not deter you from telling good original stories if that's truly something you want to do.
Well, I have a lot of friends in the industry, and they've gotten into, say, a big publisher, right? They've gotten their
Mm-hmm.
book into a big publisher, and it was a pretty big hit in the stores and stuff like that. And you'll ask them, "Oh, how'd you do?" And they're like, "Well, the book did good. I didn't get a lot of money." you know um so, like, you might see a new creator, they get in a big publisher, and maybe one of their books do get optioned, but they might go, "Oh, well, this company really didn't give me that much."
Right.
Oh, it was a great big book, and they sold a lot of copies, and I only got this, after my editor fees and the printing fees and all that stuff that they take off,
Mm-hmm.
because everything's more net profit.
Right.
And, you know, so it can be discouraging. And you might go, "Oh, cool, my peer over here, he's doing really well." But he didn't get a lot of money, for his book that, might have got nominated for an Eisner or something like that. So even if you do get success, it's not, you know, if you're not Jeff Lemire or Scott Snyder or whoever, it's very tough.
Yes.
A Kelly Thompson, she wasn't on Absolute Wonder Woman overnight. You know, I met her at Emerald City Comic-Con a long time ago, almost 10 years ago, and
Wow.
she was just like on Aftershock books and stuff like that. So, like, even if you do get some early success, you got to follow it up. It's got to be more than one book. You got to have more
Mm-hmm.
than just one book and go, "Okay, cool, I made it, and it's optioned at a studio I have no control over," and then I'm just done. No, you got to have a bunch of different books, and you got to do the convention circuit, and you have to
Right.
market, and you have to do all those things and do all those sacrifices. And then, it takes, a lot of people told me it takes 10 years, to break into this industry. And I
Hmm.
was like, I'll do it in 5, no problem. And yeah, it took about 10. Took about 10 to really kind of gain traction, and even then, it's still difficult. You know, even being in Diamond and Lunar, it's still difficult. You're really scrapping with all these other companies, and um, it's hard to beat a Boom or an Image or a Dark Horse. It's hard to get your book in that space.
Definitely 100%. And that's almost the same mentality in like in the publishing industry. One of my friends, very much had the same thing that uh he thought he could do, I could write, so many books in like 5 years, but now he's on like his fourth book, but his goal is now 10 years. And he's been writing a lot more than me. When I started, it was back in, I want to say 2020. So now it's been just 4 years. I'm just almost now at the halfway point. I have just now 3 books out, and I'm still writing on my fourth one, and I'm just continuing to hone my craft and just grow and grow. And grit transforms into talent, which is very, very true. And it may be your 10th book, 15th, or whichever book that gets your name out there, that really gets you the rewards you have sacrificed so much to achieve, that gets you what you want. Because then we can say, hey, if you enjoyed this book, make sure to check out the other ones, because I have a lot of other books to
Yep.
show. And then that's how you build new readers and build a new fan base. And speaking of fan base, as a fun little question before I get to the final one, Christopher, besides friends and family, are there any people you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you understand the comic industry much better than when you initially started all those years ago?
I mean, I can thank Boom. I interned at Boom for a while under Devin Funches and Matt Gagnog and Daphne and Shannon and a bunch of other really great editors. So I learned a lot of the business part from it. I interned there, so I didn't really get paid. So how you get paid is by just soaking in as much information as you can. So,
Experience, yeah.
that helped a lot. Devin Funches has helped. But the comic industry, it's tough, man. It's not like there's a comic school. You don't go to comic book school, college.
Nope.
So a lot of it was having to read Scott McCloud's books, understanding comics and stuff like that. I would say they were the ones who he was the one who kind of really helped me. You know, through his books. So, and then there's Stan Lee's How to Write Comics and stuff like that. So, like, those are kind of your teachers.
Mm,
Um, that's kind of where I had to learn some of the comic book stuff. It's just a difficult industry. There's not a lot of help or information on it, and people just don't make enough money off of it. Is the hard part, you know.
mm.
That's kind of the hard part. So you don't see a lot of like comic book schools.
Right. That's actually very, very true. It's almost like, in the publishing industry, like no one tells you like how to like, start a book. You just gotta figure it out on your own, like research on your own, find out what works best, learn from others, and just pick and choose which works for you to build your voice as an author and your brand as an author. And it's a trial and error a process. You will have hiccups, you will have setbacks, but you just get back on the bandwagon and just figure out, okay, what can I do better? And going back to what we talked about, debut series, your first book is not going to be the same as your other book, or the book that really gets your name out there in terms of like, writing, how you approach storytelling. It can be vastly different. And that's the point. It's to show growth and perseverance and just building your brand as an author. And so now we've come to the final question, Christopher, and I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this one, which is this. With everything you've learned thus far about the comic industry, about being, businessman, a writer, working with your team to market your books and everything, what is your word of wisdom to others who want to get into this industry or start their own companies to create their own works?
I mean, really, it's, my biggest advice now, at least kind of what's important to me, is marketing. A
Hmm.
lot of creators have the mentality of my book's great, and it's going to just be the cream of the crop that's going to rise and everyone's going to buy it. And it kind of just doesn't work that way, you know? Even if you're in Boom or Image, like I've talked about this before, it's, they're going to push Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees, or,
Right.
they're going to push Power Rangers or whatever. Even if you're an Image and Dark Horse and all those places, you have to do the marketing. You have to be on social media, even if it's uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable with social media, just try your best to learn it. Um, you're just going to have to put a lot of time into marketing and a lot of time into, for our company, where we just sent out, bookmarks to all the comic book shops that carry our books. I scour the internet of which places have our books in them. I add them to our list. I put them on marketing. I do all that stuff. I basically live at the post office sending out promotional material. I'm on your show right now. So, like, you have to be on podcasts. You have to get yourself out there. You have to post on Instagram. If you don't like Twitter, you got to just kind of learn how to like Twitter a little bit better. I mean, I have a TikTok. I'm on TikTok trying to learn that stuff too. So,
Right.
like, you just can't be shy about it, and you can't just, The First Americans, it's a great book, but if no one knows about it, no one's going to read it. And conventions are nice and stuff too. You have to do conventions. You have to do all the marketing. You have to be on
Yes.
Instagram. You have to put up some ads. You just have to. It doesn't matter. Even if you're in Dark Horse, you have to do those things, and they're not going to do them for you. So, I mean, marketing. It's all about marketing, getting people used to seeing your face at conventions, getting publishers and editors getting used to seeing you, customers,
Hmm.
getting confidence in you.
Absolutely, 100%. Marketing is probably the biggest thing, one of many things to be successful in, the industry, especially like the publishing industry, which is, very, very true. And I've had to learn that as well. I had to get an Instagram and build that as like a platform to showcase my work. I've even had to get a LinkedIn account to post there. And even that's where my newsletter is, where I get a lot of my feedback. So, it was definitely something I was not expecting, but you're right. Your book may be good, but it's going to take a lot of work for people to also know about it and appreciate it. And it just takes time, trial and error, because it is a job and it should be treated as a job. And if you have that mentality, you will be fine. And with that, viewers and listeners, we are officially at the end of this amazing interview here on the channel. I want to give a huge thank you to Christopher for coming on the show, telling us all about critical entertainment as well as the first Americans. Now, Christopher, before we end the episode, where can people find you on social media, as well as purchase copies of not just First Americans, but the other books that your company has published as well?
So the easiest place to find us is our website, which is www.criticalentertainmentla.com. That has links to all our social media, and you can purchase all our comics that are available right now through there. We're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We have a YouTube channel. So we're basically across all social media. Um, and yeah, you can find us at Comic Con, WonderCon, Anaheim's WonderCon. We're trying to get back into Emerald City Comic Con right now. And
Hmm.
then you can order all our books through Diamond and Lunar. So if you go into your comic book shop, um, We have some of our diamond codes on our social media and our website. You can order through them or just ask your local comic book shop for help. You can order some of our books through there.
Awesome. I will link all those down below in the description of this video, as well as tagging my review of The First Americans issue 1 and 2. So be on the lookout for this right over here. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for another interview here on the channel. I want to give Christopher a huge thank you for coming on the show and being my second guest from this year's LA Comic-Con. Christopher, thank you so very much for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it. And just thank you for just telling us all about First Americans, as well as your publishing company, Critical Entertainment. And we wish you the very best going forward into the new year.
Thank you, Gabriel. And yeah, The First Americans, it's in solicitations right now for Diamond and Lunar. So if you do want it, you can order issue 1 right now.
All righty. And as always, viewers and listeners, like, comment, and subscribe. And also let us know what is your favorite comic book that you've read, either growing up or just recently. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day.